appreciate everybody taking some time here to come together with us tonight. I think we'll start out of respect for everybody's time. First sort of stuff is introductory and just sort of welcome. And it's helpful for everybody to just get oriented, including myself, with WebEx. And so there's a lot of different virtual experiences. This is one of them. So there's a couple things that you'll notice is that your audio is muted, more than likely. And then you can do Q&A as part of this. Looking at step 3, you can we would ask that you send any questions that you have to all panelists. Jake with our office will be helping out answering questions as we move through this. And then if it's useful to you and you want to see the people who are chatting at you, you can change your view settings up at the top and upper right. And hopefully, let's see, I think you can probably see that. But that's up here. So tonight's agenda, we're providing sort of a little bit of background and really moving forward with sort of a welcome and introduction. We're going to talk about some of the examples of what a public-private partnership for lakefront stabilization could look like, and that's an example that's really drawn from Euclid. We'll talk about some of the regulatory framework and overview associated with that. We're going to open it up for some questions, and then we're going to assign some homework because we all love that. So ultimately, though, our goal is to provide you with sort of the tools to do that homework. And so it's to give you the background information that allows you to successfully fill out and respond to the property owners survey.
And if I just could take a minute before we jump into this, I just wanted to say hello to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mary Serby. I am the new Executive Director of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. And I just wanted to thank the team for all the work that they've done up to this point and really encourage all of you to be as engaged as possible in this process. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jim. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Mary. And thank you all for joining us tonight. You're going to hear throughout this entire effort that this isn't a plan without you. So County Planning and Smith Group, we're making every effort to engage you so we can hear your thoughts on lakefront public access and how that relates to you specifically as lakefront property owners. We mailed out last week postcards to over 3,800 lakefront property owners and asking just that. Postcards went to single-family homeowners, members of HOAs and condominium associations and apartment building owners. And I hope you received it. It looks exactly like what you see on your screen. The postcard contains a link and a QR code that'll take you directly to the online survey. And then once there, you'll be prompted and you can see on the screen to enter a code. That's actually your permanent parcel number. And that helps us geolocate where responses are coming from and what kind of support we can expect from various areas along the county shoreline. So we're going to keep this open until February 1st. So I'm hoping once you learn more about this plan tonight, you'll take the opportunity to fill out the survey. We've gotten 87 responses to date, which I believe is a 2.2 response rate. Thank you. And if you have any questions, just reach out to County Planning and we can help guide you through that. So again, we recognize you're a vital part of this plan and the county's vision for the lakefront. And with that, we'd like to present a video from County Executive Armand Budish to share his thoughts on the county's vision for the lakefront.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about one of our region's most precious assets, our lake. I'm pretty sure you understand and recognize just how great our lake is because you own property on the shore. And I agree with you, it's a wonderful, one-of-a-kind feature, one that supports recreation, commerce, industry, and our overall environment. That's why one of the county's main strategic initiatives is our Lakefront Public Access Plan. My vision is a walking and biking path all along the lake, from one end of the lake to the other. In fact, I'd like to see it from one end of the state to the other. That'll transform our entire region. How can we do that? We need to make sure that our lake is healthy. We need to make sure that our shorelines are safe from the destructive forces of erosion. And where possible, we need to expand access to the lake. Now, I know that talk of access, particularly when you're a private property owner, can be a little alarming, But let me assure you, we're not planning to take anyone's private property. What we do want to do is engage in discussions and to give you a terrific example of where we have seen a large project along the lakeshore work to great advantage both for property owners and for the public. In exchange for your voluntary agreement to allow this path to go forward, the county would take on the responsibility of helping to stop erosion along the shores. This should be a huge win for property owners. We can make your shoreline safer, and we can help increase your property values for years to come. So I hope we can begin this conversation about the Lakefront Public Access Plan and how it relates to you. I know that the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission is working to gather your input, and I look forward to hearing the feedback from this meeting and others. Our lake, it's so amazing and so unique. Let's work together to keep it that way and to make it even better for all of us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we've defined some very distinct goals for the Lakefront Public Access Plan. And as you heard from the county executive, we want to address shoreline erosion and protect private property. And we know that there are rapidly eroding trouble spots that are impacting lakefront residents right now and need to be dealt with. And I know some of you are already taking steps to address that, but we're hoping to put that in a larger context. Another goal is to enhance the health and safety of the lake. It's an ecosystem. We want to build shoreline protection that improves water quality, habitat, and again, ensures public safety. And really, we absolutely want to leverage this lake as a county-wide asset, a regional asset. And through that goal, create a connected network of lakefront access and assets. We want to link city parks, Cleveland Metro Parks Reservation, and public rights-of-way, and explore opportunities to create new public access points on private properties. So there's a lot of work going on around the lakefront and all along the lakefront. So I'm going to take this time to introduce Patrick Hewitt, Senior Planner with County Planning, to talk about that.
Thanks, Jim. The Lakefront Public Access Plan really is focused on improving public access along the entirety of the Cuyahoga County lakefront, specifically along the shoreline, but also including public and private property up to and including that first major street that parallels the lakefront, usually someplace like Lake Avenue or Lakeshore Boulevard. There's three major focuses for this planning process. The first, obviously, is public access, improving existing public access where needed, and expanding public access where possible so that more people can get down to the lake. The second is talking about erosion and ecological features. We know that high lake levels and climate change have taken their toll on the lake. So repairing and buffering against erosion in exchange for public access is an important and core part of this plan. And the third focus area of the plan is really multimodal transportation, getting people along the lakefront and between public access points, both on major streets, but also immediately adjacent to the lake. And we're partnering with our regional entities, such as NOACA, to do this. As part of the planning process, we are working with a variety of agencies who also have current planning projects underway. And the map on this slide showcases some of those projects presently. Within Cuyahoga County, the Cheers project is being completed by the Cleveland Metro Parks and some of their partner organizations in the area where MLK Boulevard meets the lakefront. The Vision for the Valley Plan is a project undertaken by the City of Cleveland and partners to look at where the Cuyahoga River meets the lakefront there in and around the flats. And the Cleveland Downtown TLCI, or Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative Plan, is looking at transportation to and through downtown Cleveland, including some areas where that touches the lake. Also within Cuyahoga County, the Community Confluence Plan is looking at the area where the Rocky River meets Lake Erie. All of these plans are important, and as part of the Cuyahoga County Lakefront Public Access Plan, we want to stitch together existing public access plans that are underway for a comprehensive plan throughout the county. At the same time, the Regional Lakefront TLCI is being completed by NOACA, and this regional plan looks at Lorain, Cuyahoga, and Lake counties to imagine transportation and access in the greater region. And we're working with all of these organizations to make sure that these plans are seamlessly linked together. As part of that, we worked with the Cuyahoga County and the Department of Public Works to hire Smith Group and their partner consulting firms. And I'll turn it over to Jason, who will be able to take us through from here.
Thanks, Patrick. It's a really exciting opportunity, and we have a pretty big team. So there's a bunch of us who are on the line tonight, and there'll be a bunch who you get to meet through upcoming meetings. And we've got these two lakefront property owner meetings on the 12th and 14th, obviously, and then one meeting with the public coming up towards the end of January, which is probably the 28th. And then we'll have some additional touch points. But we'll talk about that in more detail as we move ahead. One of the big things that we've started to do is really start to have conversations. And those conversations started with a series of stakeholder organizations and meetings. I think there was about 47 hours of virtual meetings, which is exciting for all of us who participated. But we've met with regulatory agencies, some of funders, special interest groups, some state and federal agencies who have some goals and initiatives, really to try and understand what they're doing and their perspectives on things so that we can actually fold that in with your perspectives as property owners, because that's really, as Jim and Patrick have really talked about, is that the heart of this is about public access and expanding potential public access, but only where it's wanted. We're also, as we talked about on the 28th of January, going to be having meetings with the entire resident pool within the county from the various municipalities, lakefront municipalities. That meeting is a little bit different. There's a lot of interest and understanding what's going on from their perspectives, but at the end of the day, this is really why we're having touch points with you as lakefront property owners first, is to understand your perspective, because ultimately stakeholder organizations, county resident perspectives, those all run through you, because at the end of the day, if we're going to promote public access and a public-private partnership, you're the private piece of that. So we'll talk a little bit about other things that we've started, which is really starting to look at some of the existing conditions. So including some of those dialogues we've had, we started to look at the shoreline. So we did a survey of about 30 miles of shoreline to look at the condition. And the lower right image is from Lakewood, and you can see the bluffs over there on the west side of the county generally are shale, and they look like they're stable, but they're not through geotechnical assessment. And then on the lower left, you can see that there's an image there that talks about how we've treated our shorelines in the past, and just dumping random debris with the hopes that that protects the shoreline. We know that doesn't really. There's a lot of other really important things that we started to try and understand too, particularly looking at things like green infrastructure and the creek connections at the lake, and where we can enhance the ecology. How can we tie access, shoreline protection with restoration from an ecological perspective, and addressing stormwater management as well. So there's a lot of different things that we've started to gather and perspectives we've tried to start to gather, but we're still by no means very far into the process. We're actually kind of at the beginning of a dialogue, and that's sort of where we're at overall, is the beginning of a much longer process. And so the orange box on the left is really what we're talking about. And if you looked at the overall process, if I said, how quickly is this thing going to get built? Go from here to the end, that's probably 2+ years. Just because, we're going to talk about later, permitting is probably something that's a 12 to 14-month time frame. But right now, we're nowhere near permitting. We're at the point of understanding who might be interested in a public-private partnership. So let's talk a little bit more about the specific initiative that we're doing, which is really 3 major steps. First, we're doing an opportunities and analysis and identifying sort of what community members are interested in seeing. So as we spoke about, we're talking about some of the existing conditions assessments. We've gone through and looked at the entire shoreline. We're talking with you folks tonight and on Thursday about your interest in public-private partnership, and then we're going to be getting community perspectives towards the end of the month, as we spoke about. The next step is to take the feedback that we receive from all the various parties and create some alternatives to explore early, easy wins, areas where we can make some initial investment that will enhance mobility and access to the lake. And then we're going to look at a solution that maybe is more in line with what the county executive talked about in terms of having a continuous lakefront access in some way along the 30-mile stretch. And the reality is that's going to be along the shoreline, and it's going to pop back in to inland, and it's going to pop back out. And those are kind of what we're trying to understand through that alternatives exploration process. The third one is taking sort of what we hope and dream and the early win opportunities and meshing them into one sort of final vision. That's what the third step really is. And at the same time as we're kind of creating this overall framework, the goal is to start to have or identify 2 to 4 focus areas along the lakefront where there's only receptivity, and we may be able to move forward with something in the near term. And again, that near term is probably still a 2-year time frame. So there's a couple really good examples around the Great Lakes, but I'd say one of the more well-known examples around the Great Lakes is the EUCLID model. And so if you've lived in Cuyahoga County for any length of time, or if you've visited it for a decade like I have, you've heard of this project. My question is, do we actually know anything about it? Have you been there? And so I had 3 slides that I was going to ask you guys to respond to, and we're going to give it a go. But I might have to abandon it because the reality is it's being a little goofy right now. So I'll excuse that if we have to, but I'll try it anyway, and we'll see if that works. Otherwise, we'll skip it. But so for those who are on the phone and are interested, if you take your cell phone, or if you want to take your laptop, my laptop's busy, so I'm just going to use my cell phone. You can type in, and a text is probably your easiest way on the right-hand side. You can text this phone number with this message, SG Chicago. That's Smith Group Chicago. So if you enter 22333, type in SG Chicago, it should say something like, or come up with something that says, hey, you've joined the poll. Great. If you do it on the web-based version, it's somewhat similar. It's just a little bit different. So I'll give you a second to do that. And then what I'm assuming is going to happen is my entire slideshow is going to move off to the side on the next slide. And hopefully I can still read the question to you and let you answer that way, but we'll give it a try. So, all right. This isn't a formal quiz, so you're okay. I'm going to slide to the next slide. Well, hot dog. All right. So, are you familiar with the Euclid waterfront? You can text A or B. A is yes, B is no. Of course, you can't actually see the results because you can't see my screen. Oh, 6. There's some, all right. That 13 bar down there's, they haven't been there. That's okay. You're going to learn about it tonight. And Allison Lucas-E Love, who's with the city, is going to talk to you about it. And Joe Martin, who's one of the residents along the lakefront, is going to talk about it too. Okay, we're going to try number 2. And hopefully I can remember what the question is here. Okay, which of the following statements are true? So you can see a little bit on the left-hand side. Let's see. It took 5 months. Item A, or question A, is it took 5 months to secure federal and state permits. The residents along the lakefront who gave the easements actually also paid for the construction. 0 to 100 residents signed the agreements, or A and B only. I'm beginning to think that the only person responding to this might be Allison. No. Oh, okay, good. All right. All right, good. Okay, so what I can tell you is that the only true statement here is that there were about 80 to 100 private landowners who signed easements and agreements. It actually took 14 months for us to get the permits for this project, and the residents gave easements. They didn't pay for the improvements. Okay, one more. Which of the following is also true? So waterfront or lakefront residents, A, were required to give up their shoreline. B, they had private access. The private access was restricted, meaning you couldn't have access down to the waterfront because we had public access. That's B. State, this is C, state, federal, and county grants were used to construct the lakefront, the Euclid Lakefront project, or are all of the above true? Any guesses? And I promise this is the last slide where it's goofy off to the side. All right, so the residents were not, in fact, required to give up their shoreline. They voluntarily did. Joe will talk about that in a little bit. And actually, they actually still own it. It's just an easement by the city and the state across it. Private access was not restricted, and in fact, there's instances where private access has actually helped. And yes, there were state, federal, and county grants to the tune of probably what Allison will talk about $8 million of the 13. Okay, onto an actual slide that fits on all of our screens, and you can choose to leave that meeting if you'd like. You can just type in leave or just ignore it and it'll go away. But I think from here we'll have you, Allison, kind of to hop in to talk about the lakefront, give a little bit of an overview. So you and Joe.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. And for the 80 or so % who have been to the lakefront, some of these images should look familiar. I'm going to present the next few slides in concert with Joe Martin, who is one of the residents of the Euclid Waterfront Improvement Area. He has been the longtime president of one of the beach clubs that is involved in the project, and also has private property owner affected by one of the easement agreements. And my name is Allison Lucas-Love, and I am currently the acting director of the Department of Planning and Development at the City of Euclid. And since 2016, I've been managing the Euclid Waterfront Improvement Project. So for the 20% of you not familiar, what is the Euclid Waterfront Improvement Project? It is our community's vision for a lakefront that is for not just those who are privileged enough to live along it, but for the entire community. In 2009, Euclid City Council adopted the plan. So quite some time ago, when we talk about sort of the history of the project. However, there were decades and decades of conversations even before that time about opening up the lakefront. The Euclid lakefront is not unlike most of the lakefront in Cuyahoga County in that it is largely privatized and largely the residential land use development. In Euclid, only 6% of the waterfront prior to this plan was available to the public. So some of the topography of Euclid is also not unlike the communities here on the east side of Cleveland. If you were part of the west side conversation in 2 days, you'd understand the sort of geology is a little bit different. But here in Euclid, we have about 15 to 20 feet of bluff condition above the ordinary high water mark. Again, not very much community access. So one community beach that represented just one access point down to the lake. And like I said, multiple decades of planning. One of the impetuses for the development of the waterfront was the reinvestment in the downtown and some of the commercial districts that are adjacent to that one lakefront park, which is Sims Park. And that's also been something that's been talked about as one of the reasons for doing this project is to also drive more economic development. Why did people want to do this in the first place, right? Why did council pass that ordinance back in 2009 that allowed us to do all of this planning? Well, as you can see on this slide, and as everyone on this call as a lakefront property owner is very familiar with, the lake has been eroding. Historically, there was access across the 30 miles that we're talking about now in Cuyahoga County via beaches. Those have eroded over time, and what you're seeing is the difference between 1949 and 1968. And for those of us fortunate to live along the lakefront today, we're very familiar with the increased intensity of storms, the frequency of storms, the high water levels that are causing the catastrophic erosion. So today we have the issue of erosion. We have regulatory agencies that are addressing this, such as ODNR with their temporary shore structure permits. And some of you on this call may have actually gone so far as to participate in some of those temporary shore structure permits or do your own erosion work. One thing that we have talked about in Euclid since this project was conceptualized, and what we continue to talk about here with this county project, is that erosion is the disaster of today, but the disaster of tomorrow is really the piecemeal planning. And so one thing I'd like Joe to talk about as we go to the next slide is really how the community residents, the property owners really came together, all understanding that they had the shared interest in protecting their property and recognizing that if someone to the east or the west of you doesn't undertake erosion control, your property, even with an erosion control measure, is just as much in jeopardy. And so with that, Joe, I'll turn it over to you, as some of the images on this slide are actually your property and your association's property.
Okay, my name is Joe Martin. I live on Lake Edge Drive with my wife. And what you're seeing here is, on the right side of the screen, is what used to be our street association property. And for years, we had a cement pad down there. And of course, with erosion and all the other factors, we were starting to lose a lot of that. So when the city came to us personally and as an association with this plan for lakefront development, people were nervous about losing their property, having the property turned over to the city or some other entity. But what I can tell you is that as we move through the slides, you'll see great improvements. And overall, this has been an awesome improvement for the general public, for our association, and for our private property. And we could not envision, in 5 years of talks with JJR and the city of Euclid, we couldn't have envisioned something that turned out this nice. Can you get next slide, Jason? This is basically the conditions that we had prior to the construction. And anyone who lives on the lake, I mean, I'm sure you see that now, and it gets worse by the week or by the day. So we were kind of in a spot where, hey, we'll listen to this and see what they have to say. And one thing I'll say is that over 4 to 5 years of talking with the people involved, a lot of open lines of communication, transparency, this has come out, like I said, much better than anyone ever believed. We have members of our own association who are very much against this project, afraid of losing their privacy, afraid of losing their land. And 2 of the residents in the street have come up and told me, Joe, I was wrong. This is beautiful. They use the path every day. The public access part of this is phenomenal. My wife and I have talked to hundreds of people. It's not even complete here yet. We've talked to hundreds of people from all over, from this county, from Lake County, from Summit County, who come up to see this project. And if you haven't seen it yourself, I would advise you to come up and see it. It makes people nervous to start with because, again, you figure you're going to lose something from it. But in the end, our experience has been that we really gained something. That between the city, JJR, and the contractor, it's been a pretty phenomenal thing. But like I said earlier, it took a lot of meeting too. We had tons of meetings with everyone involved. We had to come up with consensus on what we're going to do. Everyone was transparent, kept the lines of communication open, and that's really what made it a success. I mean, through all the meetings, there was a 6 or 7 page memorandum of understanding, legal document that says what everybody expects out of the project, and they followed it to the T. And in the end, it's been a fantastic improvement for our city.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Joe. Yes, this is one of probably hundreds of thousands of points of contact that Joe and I have had over our 5-year working relationship together on this project, and very much appreciate his leadership with the street. So the project drivers for this, as we talked about from the community's perspective, were of course public access. From the residents' perspective, it was the stabilization of the slopes and the wanting to protect what land did exist a few years ago when we started to take these easement agreements. And as part of that project, and as Jason will get into a little bit later, we understood that there was sort of a stopping point where we couldn't have gone any further south. But the other, the component of this, and what I think is really important for lakefront property owners to recognize, is that this is a multi-million-dollar endeavor. Almost $18 million has been spent to date on everything from planning to permitting, engineering, and of course the actual construction. And because of the public lakefront trail, the property owners who are involved in this, nearly 100 people who signed over on those easement agreements, were able to tap into funds that otherwise are not available to private property owners. And those are those federal, state, county, and local dollars that public funds that otherwise would not flow to private property owners. So again, if you've looked into undertaking public access, or I'm sorry, erosion control in your property, you know that to be true. It's privately is how you would have to finance this. So it's really the combination of the public lands the city had, but on the by and large, these easements that we took voluntarily, 50-year long-term easements from the private property owners that allowed us to create now nearly 3,000 linear feet of stabilized shoreline. And at the end of 2021, we will have 3/4 of a mile of bike and pedestrian trails along the lakefront, extending from a fishing pier that was built back in 2013 and a brand new lakefront park based on property that the city was able to acquire through grants. So again, really working in tandem. To the environmental impact, over 40,000 tons of impervious debris. So all of those existing photos of all of that unpermitted fill and rubble that has been placed in the lake and is quite frequently seen along all of our shoreline properties, that has been removed from the project, and replacing that is a near shore habitat that mimics that we would have seen decades ago when we did have those natural sand and cobble beaches. So we're thrilled that EUCLID is the model here, and we are so excited to see this expand throughout the rest of the county and throughout the Great Lakes region. If you are interested in learning more about the project and seeing all of the work that has gone into it over the past 13 years, I invite you to visit thecityofeuclid.com. And please come on down to Sims Park off of Lakeshore Boulevard and check it out for yourself.
So I get the fun slides of talking about the not so much the pictures and the slides that are shifted apparently. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about process and how you get there. And so Allison and Joe, you spoke about, this is the transparency and the continued dialogue is something that's critical in this process, and that's the same sort of thing for this. Is that again, we're here. We're back here at the beginning of having a dialogue and a discussion, and I used to run more than I do now, but it's really a marathon and not a sprint thing, because the reality is we're going to wait, move ahead, wait some more, have a lot of discussions, and then hopefully it gets built. And then, like I said, this process is multiple months. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the more complicated pieces, if you've been involved in it, is permitting. And so there's a lot of different hands in that pot, and it's not just permits, it's environmental reviews, it's historic preservation reviews, it's making sure that we're not adversely impacting the ecology or the people or the place. And so we'll touch on a couple of these little things. One of the bigger things, and this is something that I think we're going to hit on at a high level right now, and then we're going to come back to it, and come back to it again, and come back to it again, because I think, Joe, when we started this process a decade ago, it really became, well, what can we do? Where are our property lines, and who owns what? And what are we actually even asking for when we talk to residents about a public-private partnership? So I'm going to try and touch on that, and hopefully it's somewhat clear. I bet you'll have a million questions afterwards. But there's really two main regulatory lines that are important. And so I'm using the Jason to regulatory dictionary. It won't be exactly legally correct. So if you're an attorney on the phone, good, you can correct me later. But there's ordinary high water mark. And the ordinary high water mark is really a jurisdictional boundary by the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a federal boundary. It's really it's a line where you can see that normally the impact of the lake isn't really felt above that. It's kind of a line you can see as you stand on the beach typically. Then there's what's called the natural shoreline, and the natural shoreline is something that I can only describe in simple words. In 1989, if humankind had not messed with the shoreline, where would the shoreline have been? There's a whole legal proceeding case that goes along with this, but that's basically what it comes down to. In 1989, if you didn't go out there and put fill in there or do anything else or whatnot, where would that line be? And so it's actually a really complicated process, but what's important about that is when we start looking at easements and agreements with private landowners and understanding that we're going to have an easement and agreement with the state too, we need to understand where that boundary is. So both of these two lines, the ordinary high water mark and the natural shoreline, are actually things that are defined before our project exists. They're based upon the current conditions. And in some instances, right now I'm showing the ordinary high water mark landward of the natural shoreline. In some instances, it's out beyond that, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So this is our Euclid model. Joe, you're familiar with this stretch, I imagine. So the pier is great. This is probably about 4 or 5 months ago at this point, at least. But one of the big things we had as goals that we worked through at the onset of the project is you have residents at the top of a bluff, you have backyards, and you have homes, and you have improvements. So one of the key things was understanding where that boundary was and making sure that we didn't pull it back further than what we maybe maybe they would want. So here's the top of the bluff that existed roughly, and what we ended up doing in this instance is putting in walls. We couldn't push out further because of regulatory restrictions. There's a whole discussion about that we could go into it. Well, it's not for now. Let's just say we maintained the top of bluff because that was one of the prerequisites that Joe and the rest of the residents said is, I'm not going to lose my backyard for this. I mean, I want shoreline protection, but come on, stabilize the bluff. Critical. That's what the entire project is about. I've got my home and my property at the top of the bluff. I want to make sure it's there in the future. We wanted to enhance public access. Again, Allison spoke about, only 6% of the shoreline was accessible at one point in Euclid, and so this really opens up a pretty dynamic and wonderful opportunity for residents. We wanted to create some habitat because if the more we link restoration and recreation, the more opportunities we get for funding. And then we want to enhance that lake health as the county executive spoke about. Well, so I'm going to go through sort of those lines that we talked about, the natural shoreline, ordinary high water mark, and some of the other key lines. And I'm going to use the case study of Euclid to just talk about that. And so we touched on that a bit ago, which is this line here, top of bluff. These residents were clear in the discussions that maintaining that top of bluff was critical to them. They did not want it pulled back into their backyards. There wasn't extra room there. But this landowner over here, which is further down the shoreline, said, yeah, go ahead and pull it back. I don't care. I was going to step this area anyway and put in some development later. So he ends up acquiring the property, but won't, that's not really the point at this point. But we were able to pull that back. And so there's different situations based upon what the adjacent landowner actually was interested in allowing. And so we can work with people through that design process. So as we start to identify where there's receptivity, we can start having those more detailed discussions. So let's take it one step further. The ordinary high water mark, remember that federally defined boundary. It's essentially a lake level. It's 573.4 is the elevation, IGLD, International Great Lakes Datum of 85. And basically it's where does that water level hit the land as it exists today? And they don't care whether there's been unpermitted fill. They don't care whether there's been excavation. All they care about is where that exists and where it hits the shoreline. Because the reality is, as the federal government, they don't have the ability to go through and determine what's been filled, what hasn't been filled. They don't have the capacity to do that. So they just take that boundary and say, okay, that's the boundary. That's one regulatory boundary. Second regulatory boundary, as we talked about, is the natural shoreline. That's if people didn't mess with the shoreline, where would the shoreline have been roughly in 1989? And that process is much more complicated, and it involves looking at historic aerial photos and going through that exercise. But what that is it defines the actual boundary between public and private lands. So when I go to a plat map, when I look up, I own a property right now that has half of a road on it. This is the same sort of thing. I don't actually own that road. It's basically a part of my land I don't get to use. Well, the same thing here. Platted property lines extend out into the lake. I don't know, Joe. Maybe it didn't quite extend that far in some areas. I don't remember it offhand. I was using it for illustration purposes. But the idea is that even though it's platted, it's actually submerged. And the reality is that if we hadn't touched it, the natural shoreline would be back here. And that's a discussion and a negotiation with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And so that forms upland and state waters of the state, essentially. If you combine those two, the blue line and the red line, and if you take nothing away from that discussion other than the blue line and the green line, whatever is most landward is the point at which you can start coastal structures, meaning and where you can put the trail, meaning I can't put non-water dependent use. I can create a path anywhere is the point, but I can't create a path by filling the lake unnecessarily. So this boundary, either the blue or the red, creates that boundary line between where we can put coastal improvements like breakwaters, revetments, beaches, and where a public access trail or private improvements could occur. Why that matters is really because when you go through the survey process and you answer the question of, am I interested in a public-private partnership? Yes. Maybe I need more information. No. If you say maybe or yes, what you're saying is that we're going to have a continued dialogue, and you're not saying we're immediately moving towards building something. But what we're basically asking for, or in the future, will be easements on some portion of the bluff that protects the shoreline improvements and a public access path. That easement and agreement was between, in this case, for Euclid, the landowners in the city. And then there's a different agreement, which is called a submerged lands lease. And it's really between the landowner, the city, and the state, because this is waters of the state. I can go there, anybody can go there, that's the point. So it's a little bit different. That's a different mechanism, and it varies by state. But so what we're going to be asking is a yes or a maybe will eventually mean that we're going to be talking about these two in more detail. So this blue line, red line thing, don't worry about it right now. Just know that we're going to have a lot of dialogue on it, and that's okay. It'll just be an education for everybody. So back to where we are in this process. Again, we talked about a countywide plan. We're here, right? And we've got some initial activities we're doing, hopefully with the goal of identifying where there's some interest in a public-private partnership. So where there are people who are like-minded with Joe and saying, you know, hey, this is a benefit. I'm giving up something, but I'm getting a lot too. So that's sort of what that's about, is starting to identify those areas so we can have those more focused discussions about where are those improvements okay and where are they not. But remember, we're at the beginning of a long process. So if you think that something's going to happen tomorrow, it's not. It's probably 2 years. So with that, I guess, Jim, did you want to close this out, or was this me to continue for the rest of it? Okay.
You're on a roll. Go ahead.
Sounds great. I can remember. So lakefront access plan goals is, Jim, you spoke about in the onset, right? The idea, yep. and I think the county executive spoke about the goals. And I'm going to touch on or reinforce a couple of goals I think that others have expressed, Allison and Joe. I think what you talked about is critical in that in a parcel by parcel situation, where I'm trying to protect my 80 or my 120-foot parcel. The reality is what happens next door behind Joe's house, Joe doesn't control unless he partners with them. And that's what brought people to the table, is understanding that waves don't come directly at your property line. They come east and west of your property line too. And so that really became if I want to solve it, I need to solve it at scale. Again, we want to link restoration, recreation, access, mobility, however you want to characterize it, and ecology, because that's how you get to different pots of funding. And so when we're starting to look at what areas are flooding, what areas have opportunities for habitat enhancements, that's because we're trying to identify how we can make this project a win in a variety of different senses. We do want to respect property owner rights. And again, so the question of if he's answered, I'm not really interested in a public-private partnership, that tells you you're not interested. And that also tells the county that's not where we're looking for a project. And so it's a pretty straightforward thing, as I think everybody talked about, and I think the county executive highlighted. This isn't about taking people's property. It's looking for opportunities to collaborate. And then the one other thing I'll touch on is just permitting is complex. And while there are expedited permit processes, you still have to go through the ultimate formal permitting process. That's a huge cost, and that's a huge amount of time. And so we can do that collectively. That saves some energy and makes it much more efficient. And EUCLID's project is considered the largest lake fill ever permitted by the state of Ohio. I don't know that it's good or bad necessarily, but I guess from my perspective, it's because of the length of it, right? And doing things incrementally results in the same outcome. It's just you get a lot more benefit when we start to think about it collaboratively. So, Jim, as you spoke about earlier, it's pretty straightforward to give us your comments. There's the website, the card, and I noticed there's a couple comments from folks that they haven't yet received their cards, wondering about delivery on that. So we can talk with you about that. But put that parcel identifier in the online survey. That would be helpful to us in terms of understanding linking your response to the property. And then there's always an opportunity to provide questions. I think there were a couple of folks who specifically said, we haven't gotten our card yet. I'd certainly ask you to reach out to the county, and you can certainly do that this way to make sure that we get you access to that. And with that, I think we're going to open it up to Q&A, and I've got highlighted in the upper right-hand side all panelists. If you could reply or send that to that. That'll allow Jake and I to help manage that, and we can get over to other folks, Mary or Patrick or Jim or anyone else on our panel to respond to. But Jake, I guess, do you have any initial sort of thoughts that you're hearing, or anyone with the county want to actually have any initial sort of opening remarks on that?
Jason, I think we've received sort of a variety of questions here, a lot of which we've answered, but not a lot that are necessarily super specific to what we're trying to do here, other than the latest question that just came in. Would you like me to read it to you?
I actually, oddly enough, do have it because I pulled it up, so that's great. Well, I'm assuming it's this one about the shoreline revetment and construction timeframe?
Yes.
Super. I'll start there. That's a great question, Joyce. Would the shoreline revetments and bike path be constructed or public access be constructed at the same time? Who handles permitting? Is the county looking for 50-year easements as in the Euclid plan? I'll address those in general terms. Well, actually, pretty specific terms. The answer is you build things at once. If you're going to work on a section of shoreline, you're probably building it all at one time. That makes the most sense. In terms of permitting process, the goal is to not have individual homeowners. In fact, permitting agencies don't want to deal with individual homeowners. They would prefer to deal with it collectively, so they would prefer that whoever leads this, and it's the county in this instance, would be the entity who would be submitting permits on behalf of, with easements and agreements in place that would allow them to submit for the project overall. So that would be handled by the county. And then in terms of easements and agreement duration, the state for the submerged land lease requires a minimum of, or requires a 50-year, or specifies that. And so they would require that the county, potentially in this case, would actually be a leaseholder for a term of not less than 50 years, or 50 years exactly. And the other piece of it that's related to that is if you're going to place funding into this. And so when we start talking about agency funding sources, they also get a little finicky about making sure the improvements that they paid for are protected and there. So there is usually some commitment in terms of it's not 1 year, it's not 5 years. It's probably in that 25 to 50 year range, and probably 50 year for the lakefront improvements. Hopefully that answers your question. Jake, any other ones that you want to highlight?
Yeah, Jason, what happens if, say, 20 of your neighbors decide to do the project, but there's a holdout? One person doesn't want to.
Well, I think that's actually not dissimilar, Joe, from what we experienced, right? There was a lot of talking back and forth. There's one gentleman who I can't remember his name right now. I don't think he lives there right now, but he was pretty adamant, but it was a discussion back and forth. I think part of it is that we're going to probably find, I think, Jim, you said you joked that I think we're at a 2% response rate. If we got to a 20-25% response rate, I would feel super outstanding on this. So I'm expecting we're going to find a lot of holes in terms of if we found 20 residents right now who are interested and there's one that's not in the middle of it, I think we'd start to have more focused discussion. So, obviously you're not going to force somebody to give up their land. That's not what this is about. So probably try and work around that and probably have some more focused discussions to understand the concerns specifically about it. That's probably the best answer I can give you, Jake.
If I could just chime in real quick, I know early on here in this project, there were people that were against it, like I said, but the more information, the more meetings we had, and the more people learned, those people kind of fell off and got on with the program and said, hey, this is the right thing to do. And as far as working with JJR and our city, no one has ever put anyone, to my knowledge, in a spot that says, hey, you do it or we're going to take it. That's not the idea of the whole thing. So if you just learn a little bit and get along, it's early in the process, like Jason said, but as time goes on, you can learn more. You'll get to like the program.
It's entertaining, Joe. I don't know if you remember. I think the first time we met, I think I said you'll learn to love me. I think was the joke, is that we end up talking so many times that you actually know what's going on in people's lives, and what's important about that is that you have to build that trust and understanding, because this isn't a one and done type thing. So
it's in the beginning too. People are fearful that hey, you're going to take my property, and it just isn't the case. That's not the point.
So with increased public access to the waterfront, we have a couple questions that address concerns about just more people being down there in terms of security, light pollution, noise, that sort of thing. Can you speak to that?
I think I can speak to it in general, and I'll ask, I suppose, Allison and Joe to kind of comment on it. I think one of the challenges that we have is exactly that, and that we talked a lot with residents. There were a couple who were particularly concerned, and I think if I characterized it this way, and I guess guys correct me if you disagree, one of the biggest challenges was the construction period, because it was partially open, partially not, partially clear, partially not. We didn't have signs up that said this is private property. So I think there's becoming a new norm in terms of how you manage, how that works. And it seems like once we get the landscape growing in and we get everything sort of addressed, it seems like it's improving substantially. I know there were some initial concerns, but it seems like that's gotten better, guys. So I guess, Allison, Joe, can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, I'll also say that I think the real opportunity here is to partner with regional and local park districts. So the city of Euclid maintains the trail and the bluff along the easement area for the private property owners as part of our parks program. And as part of that, we also patrol it with both our auxiliary and regular police force. And so, in the future, looking at areas across Cuyahoga County, whether that's a partnership with the metro parks or individual municipalities' park systems, I think that's certainly a conversation that will occur over time. The Euclid project also does have lighting along it, so from a security standpoint. And again, because it's part of our park system, has the same rules and regulations in terms of hours, which for us are dawn to dusk, And that's with the exception of the private property owners, right? Because it's still your land. We just have an easement over it to create a public access space. So, Joe, that might be a segue for you to talk about, your experience now that at least the phase in front of your house is done, as well as, some of the site security issues that we did have during construction, and to sort of put the positive spin on that. I mean, we had people physically moving the construction barriers because they so desperately wanted to ride their bike on this new trail. So that's good and bad, right?
Joe, I'm going to ask Joe and also touch on the discussion about lighting, if you could, because we had a big discussion about, I don't want lights up here, I want lights down here. Sorry, I just want to have you
start with that. During the MOU process, it was a concern of ours personally and the street association that the path was going to be lit with highlights that would ruin sunsets and that sort of thing. And again, through conversation and discussion, we got what we wanted, which were low lights, which from the top of the bluff at our house, you can't even see them at night. But when you're on the path, they do work. Jason was right when he said during the construction period, you get people that are curious. They're going to climb the bluff. They're going to be in locked off construction spaces where they shouldn't be. If I told you that didn't happen, I'd be lying. But what I can say today is that now it's substantially completed and things are locked up and there are signs up. We have very little trouble with trespassing or anything. There are going to be more people down there, but it's not like you have 150 people walking by the house. People are using quiet enjoyment of the path to enjoy the lake. So, again, that was a major concern of me and my wife because we thought, no one knew we lived here. No one even knew our street was here. And now it's exposed and people do know, but we have not had any problems. So that's
I think one of the things that we talked about at the onset of the project was and it's actually funny, as bad as that shoreline was, some of the images that we showed for Euclid, people were down there. And they were down there doing things that I don't think people would want. And so there's a self-policing component to this in terms of actually having people who are walking along these trails and are actually, one of the best things that it's funny. One of the things I heard that people love about Sims Park is the disc golfers, because they go into every nook and cranny where nobody else wants to go to throw the discs around. And it's the same sort of thing here. More eyes typically results in some, surveillance that is helpful.
Jason, I've had a couple questions here that are specific to people's individual properties. Yep. And I think the overall sort of question here is there an approach going to be taken specifically for each property? Are there going to be specific discussions with homeowners?
Yeah, there'll be an extreme amount of discussion with individual homeowners. Joe, we had I don't know, I would guess in the 20 range meeting at least with your entire group to talk about it, because every single property owner along his beach club had common interest in the end parcel, so it was important that they all be engaged, and they had to have in their instance universal approval. In other associations it's just a majority, so it's variable depending upon your situation. So we will be having individual discussions with residents, but I think it's going to be in those focus areas. So if we found, and I think I'm just perusing here a couple of questions here and there. I've seen some people ask, well, if we had 20, we talked about that earlier, 20 with one parcel that isn't interested in the middle, we may have individual discussions with them. But if there's one property out of 400, I'm probably not going to talk with you about it, because unless that property is substantial in terms of length or something like that. So I think our initial screening is to understand whether there's an interest. And frankly, I would expect that a lot of people are going to say, maybe, just the same thing we had in Euclid, maybe, but I need more information. And that's totally legit and totally understandable. And I've seen a couple of comments that have come in that actually are saying, I might have answered the question differently if I understood what the project's about. So I'm going to ask those individuals, and I responded to one or two of them, that if you have that situation where I answered the question not the way I wanted, yes, no, or maybe, if you can just go to the county's website and email them, and I'll pull back up to that slide. If you can just email them on this site, and we do actually have the recording, so we actually do have people's names too, so we can try and reach out that way as well. But that would be helpful to us is to get that information. Any other kind of comments or questions or things, Jake, that you have?
Yeah, there's maybe you can speak a little bit as to how this project may impact property owners economically. That's
a great question. It's one of those. I'll start, and I'm going to have some other folks probably answer that a little bit too. If I said, and there's a couple instances having traveled the entire lakefront, where that particular building or structure will not exist without this project. That is about stabilizing the value of that property right now, because there was probably a liability on the hands that you stand to lose a tremendous amount. Is that increasing the property value or just protecting and stabilizing it? I'd probably go with protecting and stabilizing it. Is it going to increase your property values? I think it potentially could. I don't know that. I don't have stats on that, I guess, but I think it does speak to, in Euclid's case, there has been some interest from one property owner in particular who was going to initially sell after this project started coming on. He thought, this might be interesting, I might stay. So does it affect and influence where people will live? Perhaps buy, maybe, which maybe has an economic impact, I guess. Allison or Joe, you guys have any thoughts on any of that, or maybe somebody else too?
Just go ahead, Allison.
No, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, just speaking for me and my wife, our erosion here, probably 3 years prior to when this project started, really started to get pretty drastic. I mean, we were losing big chunks of land at a time, so it got really concerning. Prior to that, we weren't too concerned. It seemed to us it stayed kind of the same over 15 years. But when we first got into this discussion, and we lived 2 miles down the road from here prior to living in this home, we thought of it as a public access project. And we thought for the city, it would be a good thing. And then when we moved on the lake, and you start to think of things differently, well, I don't want to share this with everybody, but when you put the combination of what's happening with erosion and the public good that it can do and the economic impact in this city, we haven't seen it yet, but we know it's coming because you talk to people down there, they're coming from all over. So I think ultimately, and we can't say for sure, but I think ultimately, as the city improves, property values will improve. So that's just my position on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in Euclid, we have seen an increase in property values, most substantially those that are on the lake. Part of the financing for this project is sort of an innovative economic development tool called a tax increment financing district. And that actually captures the increased value of the property over time. And those funds go back into supporting the project, and every year we see an increase in the quantity of funds rolling into that. So we know that even though the project's not done and we haven't foreseen all of the economic impact, that there is a benefit to the area at large, and certainly the individual property owners. I think from an economic standpoint, I also do just want to reiterate that if you were to undertake a standalone erosion control project, you would be financing that as a private resident. You may be able to find that at a bank. There's a lot of lenders who are very hesitant. They don't understand, what it is to put rocks in the water, and it does cost, anywhere from tens of thousands to a few $100,000, depending on, how correctly you're doing the work. And what this does is open up the opportunity for financing and grant funds, social impact investing on a totally different scale that not any one of us as individuals could access on our own. But with a regional, regionally, this is very attractive. In Euclid, we received federal funding from NOAA and FEMA because of the way we structured those 50-year easements, the long-term easements to a previous question. but because of all of the property owners that were involved. So your out-of-pocket expense to get the erosion control could certainly be less because of this effort by the county.
Just by way of interest, so sorry, Joe, didn't mean to cut you off. The way of interest, if you just ballpark the estimate for what Euclid's lakefront protection costs, and you hit a very interesting and entertaining comment. This is not dumping rocks in the water. It looks like a pile of rocks, and it is rocks, but it's a highly engineered pile of rocks that's intended to withstand something. That's $2,500 to $4,500 a foot is what we're looking at. I mean, I just worked with Bay Village residents, and it's expensive. And so if you start to think about that and multiply that out, and you start to understand that there's a methodology and a construction and a size to all this stuff, and it's not just because it's been permitted doesn't mean it's done right. I can guarantee that. So, sorry, Joe, you were gonna say something.
We have family members in Men on the Lake that just did their own revetment project, spent upwards of $100,000, and it basically was dropping rocks in the lake. And I think to Jason's point, that's okay for today, but nothing's being done east or west of them, so we don't know how long that's going to hold up. Another thing that you had in the slides earlier was the model that you built, studying the lake bottom. This is, the project here isn't just throwing stuff in the water. This was highly engineered and really interesting, so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, this is enjoyable. 2.5 months spent in wave tank that looks at water level fluctuation, waves from different directions. We get a little surly, so we have to entertain ourselves with figures and stuff. But we get to explore longshore transport of sediments. We get to explore stability, all those types of things. So you can imagine that some of these things could be the technical pieces that we look at to understand how can we create a stable profile. Each of the colors on the stones are different size stones to make sure they're not moving. There are rules of thumb for things, and then there's coastal engineering, and that's what this is about, is actually doing the right thing, because dumping rocks in the water isn't going to protect your shoreline long term. It'll just erode behind it. Jake, any other sort of comments or questions that are kind of themes that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of questions as far as beaches, parks, places that people go already on the lakefront, and what are some of the impacts to some of those areas. And specifically, it's quite an interesting question here. I'll just read it verbatim. In areas where there's no interest from property owners or it's not feasible to put it down at the water's edge, are you considering enhancing bike lanes along lakeshore, or is there a safer and wider path that connects?
It is variable by community, and I can say that after our hours of stakeholder meetings, Lake has got some enhancements in some communities, particularly Lakewood, to try and look at bike ped improvements that would get you over to some of the existing public access points along the lake. And then there are other geographies where we're probably looking at either a parallel system off road or something that might go along the lake. So I think it's variable. As to touching existing parks, some of those parks are public, some of them are owned by associations, and in Euclid's case you had all of those. In fact, some of them were like Beach Club, they're park land, if you will, and they decided that was useful to open up to shore protection and public access. But at the same time, they still have, and Joe, your association is a good example, actually has private access down through that to the trail, and it's locked and it's keyed and all this other stuff. So I think it's variable depending upon which specific park, and that is one of the next steps. Is once we get sort of the response of where there's some receptivity, we can start to dig into what the opportunities might be, and that's really a next step function in my mind.
Yeah. A follow up to that is, I think we've addressed it in a number of ways, but maybe we tackle it head on. Is how do you keep people from accessing it after hours? How do you keep people from wandering up into your backyard and keeping people from where they shouldn't be on private property?
Yeah, that's part of it is that the bluffs are not exactly shallow, meaning they're pretty steep. That was part of it. And the landscape character is this green edge here will be grasses that are about 3 feet, 4 feet tall eventually. They're not treed for reasons of stability, but this is a good example, and I guess I wish I had the other photo, and I don't think it's in here, but there's actually gates, so this staircase isn't a lot, you can't get up here. There's a gate with a keypad or a, we're still working through on what's the best method for everybody to use, because some people want a key, some people just want to touch code, but this is helping with some of that in terms of managing the access up that, and it's gated at the top and it's gated at the bottom for public access, to restrict public access to those zones. There at this point on the east and west sides, and then public access points to the lakefront trail. There's no gates. It's signed, and then I think the city comes through and just kind of make sure that, like any other park, they sweep through once in a while, and make sure that there's not a bunch of people out there. And Allison, any thoughts or anything that I didn't miss or missed?
Sure. So this is a under construction progress photo. So like Jason said, what you're not seeing is that there is a gate. There's also a sign that has a city ordinance on it that says no trespassing. Very easy to prosecute should there be a trespasser. Like Joe said before, before these walls, before these stairs were in place, there was, quite a bit of, trespassing, just because it was not clear what was public and private. If you do have the opportunity to go there today, you will see that it is a very clearly defined private versus public space. The stairs that you see in this photo that go down to the beach are publicly accessible. The stairs that go back landward to the private property are not. I saw a few questions in here, and I think this is a good slide to leave this on here too. And Joe can speak very well to this, because not only is he a private property owner where we had a temporary easement agreement across his personal property, but this actually is a beach club lakefront park. So their beach club association's park, that is the majority of the easement agreement. And so some of the questions that I saw, we're talking a lot about individual private property owners, but this is a beach club held street that you're looking at here in Euclid. So very similar to the beach club streets that you see in North Collinwood. So in terms of whatever the bylaws were for that street, that's how the voting moved forward, right? So if you had, one resident who was maybe not a fan of having their private beach club go this way, like Joe said before, over time, these conversations start to change people's mind when they start to understand the benefit. But also, if your bylaws don't need unanimous decision making, maybe you don't need every single property owner on the street to be completely on board with that. And so this is showing just really how limited the city's property, or the city's property and our ownership was when we started this, and how truly you had to work with not only individual property owners in the parcels you see there, but we had 2 beach clubs involved, as well as apartment buildings. So kind of a microcosm of what we will continue to find throughout Cuyahoga County, both at the individual park club and apartment level.
So this is the parcel here that's commonly owned among all property owners along this street. And that one, I think you have unanimous was the bylaw. Is that right? So everybody on that street had an easement agreement. So I've seen some questions about should associations be getting together to have a discussion. Yeah, but the reality is we're also going to talk with you about it a million times between now and then. So that's good. This association, there's no public street. So that's actually a private street. It's signed like that. They have common interest in the end parcel, but they were a majority. So it just said it needed a majority of the residents to sign on. Not that I think that they wouldn't have anyway. So it's variable depending upon where you are and your specific condition, which is why, I can't answer everything to 100% because it's all so variable. But there's a couple of comments about should you convene, get a neighborhood meeting together, get a conversation started. It's probably useful, but again, we'll have those dialogues. But if we saw that one association had, 25 or 30% of the people saying, yeah, we might be interested, that's probably worth a greater dialogue with the county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one other thing I see in the comments that I think is very relevant is talking about what types of improvements. Of course, you're getting down to the individual property level and talking about what exists and what you hope to see in the future. So those memorandums of understanding that Joe mentioned, that captured all of the existing conditions of the individual property. So for Joe's Beach Club, they had access. There was a set of stairs, and in a photo that we saw throughout the presentation, they had a concrete pad that they used as a sort of a patio condition at the water's edge. And so the city committed as part of the negotiations to replacing those improvements. Another beach club did not have access. They had virtually a wall of trees. So not only could they not physically touch the lake, they could hardly see the lake as lakefront property owners. So this is a dramatic improvement for them, just in how they're able to, not only is this public access, right? This is private access for you. You may be a lakefront property owner that can see the lake and not touch it. For them, the lake was in their backyard and you could hardly know it. But they actually all elected to have an assessment be placed upon themselves through the county, through their tax bill, to build in a stair that accesses the public trail. So they have direct private access from their beach club to this new public trail because of that decision-making process over time. So the types of improvements you want to have are certainly not even limited to what we've presented here and what you see in EUCLID, but are just sort of starting points. And we recognize that EUCLID's condition with the bluff, I think in most cases was really beneficial. Certainly in other areas of Cuyahoga County, there are private beaches. There are areas where the top of bluff condition is not 15 or 20 feet above the ordinary high water mark. So those are all things that will be looked at in detail, as we drill down to the micro level of this.
I enjoy where this is going because people are getting past they get the concept of it, which is good. And so we're getting to the point now where the questions get to talk to me about my specific situation or how do I get more information. That's great. That's good. And I appreciate those questions and things. I can't answer them right now, but the reality is this is, like I said at the beginning, this is you're on this marathon, not sprint. And we're going to have a lot of touch points and discussions, but for us to understand where there's some level of interest in a public-private partnership, we need you to respond that maybe or yes. If you respond no, we're probably not prioritized looking in that area. So if you want to have some more discussions, understand more, that's great. And we'll have those hurdles and milestones. And like Joe, I think we had 3 different types of agreements with you. One was just, okay, there's a little more specificity at this point. Then there's a little more specificity at this point. And then this is actually legally binding. And half of the agreements before that weren't. But we need to have some commitment because it's expensive and costly to plan too far ahead. So we're going to need some level of increasing commitment as we move forward. Right now, your commitment is nothing. So you can. I think the answer is just to get to those points where we can have more specific dialogues. Just answer it with maybe I'd be interested, but I got to learn more, and that's great. We have a couple more minutes, but at this point, I'm not seeing a whole lot of new comments and questions, and there are a lot of great questions about lighting and how do you deal with outfalls from sewer districts, and we've talked with sewer districts. That's all good stuff. We know what's going on there and how we can maybe partner with it. Security is always a concern. There's questions about who's included in this. Right now, it's all property owners within Cuyahoga County. That includes Brattonall, and that includes Euclid, and that includes Cleveland. And don't ask me what's going to happen with Burke Lakefront Airport. I don't know the answer. I'm not going to even be able to pretend. So good question. I don't have the answer.
Jason, I think one more thing in here that's a little specific, but it's been asked a couple times.
Sure.
Is there any, if people have taken action to revet their bluff and to stabilize, is there any chance of getting any sort of reimbursement on that privately?
Does that improvement allow access that would benefit somebody beyond the adjacent property owners? Then if the answer is no, then probably not. If the answer is yes, then I think we could have a discussion about how would that fit with public-private partnership. But if it's just for stabilization purposes, this isn't, these are public dollars we're talking about on the grant side, particularly, and to stabilize Joe's backyard for Joe's fun. I mean, I like Joe and all, but I can't do it. So the reality is that there has to be some public benefit here. So it's probably a case-by-case situation, but I'd have to really understand a lot about it and whether it's done right and does it have any benefit that's beyond just shore protection and to the broader community. So probably a good non-answer there, but always worth a discussion. Super.
Jason, I want to jump in for just a second. First, to thank Joe, who I've not actually had the opportunity to meet before. So thank you so much for giving your insight. That's just been incredibly helpful. And of course, our partners at Public Works. Just as some information for folks listening, countyplanning.us/lakefront owners, the website that was included on your postcard, that will continue to be updated throughout this process. And that is a page specific for property owners. It's going to be a clearinghouse of information. So if you want to go there at any point throughout this process, we'll continue to be updating it. So that includes videos from this meeting and the next meeting. We also have frequently asked questions that are currently on that page directly related to lakefront owners. We'll keep adding more as we get more questions in. And that also has that comment box. You can post a comment there. It will come to us. We'll be able to get back to you. We'll be able to answer questions or send it to Jason or Allison or Joe if we need some assistance with some of those. But that's a great way that you can continue to get in contact with us both now and through the rest of this process.
Thanks, Patrick. That was a great plug for use of the website and all that. We do have an FAQ, like you said, that is like every question that we could imagine. I mean, it's not every question, but it's a lot of them. So you should make sure to go through that. It does provide some answers. Again, I think we're getting to the point where people are generally understanding what the concept is, and there's a lot of specificity that we'd want to be able to provide, and that's great. I mean, that's super exciting. I'm seeing a lot of excitement. Sarah, I enjoyed your Burke Lakefront comment. That was entertaining to me. Let's see. How can I find the normal lake level line on my parcel? Oh, heavens. The question was, how can I find the normal lake level line on my parcel? Surveyor. That's my simple answer. Or you can go on and, surveyor. That's my best answer. I could come up with some other answers that would get you the answer, but outstanding. Any other parting thoughts from anyone else? Otherwise, I think we've got a lot of great dialogue. I want to reinforce that if you're leery, you're concerned, you didn't understand it. If you're like me and you need to read something 3 times to actually get it, 'cause that's kind of me. Attend on Thursday. I don't care whether east or west. It's an opportunity to hear it a second time. You can hear the same thing. Hopefully, it'll be a little bit different. And hopefully I'll have my slides working by then. But you'll hear the same sort of thing and I'd encourage you to also participate and show up on the 28th, where the public meeting is, where we're going to have a public meeting, because one of the keys that I think Joe hit on was that this is about open and clear communication. So I'm not going to be saying anything different to them as the residents as I am to the landowners, because the reality is y'all got to hear the same thing, otherwise it doesn't work. So I encourage you to show up for those 2 upcoming sessions. That would be wonderful. Yeah, think of something in the meantime. Obviously email like Patrick reinforced. Otherwise, I think, are we comfortable with where we are?
Yeah, I would just like to thank you, Jason and Jake, for running through the slides today, and your team for putting all this together. Obviously, I'm new to the team, and I just thank you, all of you who've been participating in this, and all you property owners that are out there. Thank you for giving up your evening to listen in on this. And if there are neighbors and friends that may not have heard about it, make sure that you get them involved and share this website information with them, because we really do want to make sure that we're reaching everyone that needs to be reached on this project. It's really important to the county and all our departments and making it a success. So thank you to all of you.
Super. We'll take the comments from tonight. We'll capture those, Jake, after the meeting, get those out to the group. But otherwise, we'll also end the recording, and then we'll get that off to the county, and we'll get that posted as soon as possible, so that others who didn't have the opportunity to participate tonight can see it. Thanks so much, everybody.